Chapter 51. The Expired Passport. 40 days passed since Inaz and her husband attended that UN office interview. Until that day, Inaz did neither receive positive nor negative reply from her legal representative. Finally, the couple's financial condition compelled them to decide to follow the advice of the UN legal representative and travel back to Africa. The persecuted couple reached the stage of not being able to buy new clothes or shoes. They were led by their miserable situation to sell many of their personal things and buy food. Joseph stopped going to his college and began the process of taking his loving wife to live with him in his family's house in Addis Ababa. He decided not to tell his parents and siblings about his wife until they reached there. For the couple to travel to Africa, Inaz needed to get a spousal visa to Ethiopia. She had to travel again to New Delhi and go to the Ethiopian embassy and apply for a spouse visa. But, before going to her husband's embassy, she needed to renew her passport first. No embassy in the world would issue a visa to an expired passport. To renew her passport, she had to go to the place where that pernicious plot of her kidnap and forcible transfer to her country was hatched. Nonetheless, Inaz was scared that she might meet the same end the Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Adnan Khashoggi had met after entering his country's consulate in Istanbul. In the eyes of her country people, her crimes were more serious than those of Khashoggi. Jamal was brutally murdered and his body was cut by axe just because he criticized the Saudi royal family. Inaz became an apostate, married a Christian man, did that without the knowledge and consent of her wali, and because of her, many Hindu journalists called the Prophet of Islam fanatic prophet, child molester, rapist, murderer, invader, and bloodthirsty terrorist. Many Muslims condemned the cowardly murder of the Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Adnan Khashoggi, but Inaz knew no Muslim in the world would condemn her murder. Even the Prophet Muhammad said, "The apostate from Islam must be killed." To avoid such a sad end, Joseph suggested that his wife shouldn't go to apply for her passport's renewal in person. They found online application form of the Sudanese embassy and filled it. Then they printed it out and mailed it to the embassy. They had sent along with the application, the expired passport and a check with the required amount of money. They sent the application with a tracking number mail to ensure that the embassy had received the passport and signed the reception paper and therefore could not say they hadn't. Moreover, the couple had sent an empty return envelope with the necessary stamps fixed on it. So, the wise couple didn't leave any loophole for the officials of the Sudanese embassy to deny the receipt of the passport or refuse to renew it and return to Inaz Bombay's address. The couple had expected this process would not take a week time or at the most 10 days. When 2 weeks had passed and the renewed passport didn't arrive, Inaz sent a fax to her embassy. She requested the embassy to send back her passport. No reply or her passport had come after waiting for another week. Inaz then tried to talk through the phone to someone in her embassy and find out what had happened to her application and passport. All her calls were forwarded to an answering machine. She left many messages begging the officials to respond to her calls and tell her what they had done to her passport. Finally, the couple decided to return to the inferno of India and live for a while in that place of torment of the southern Sudanese students. After going through another nightmare in that train of the condemned people, the couple once again reached New Delhi. This time, the poor lovers came to the capital of India during winter season. It was more bearable for someone to travel to the Arctic region than arriving in New Delhi in winter. The lovers felt as if they landed inside a freezer. In that freezing temperature there was no heating system in buses, houses, schools, offices, stores, etc. Shaking and chilling to the bones, the miserable couple took a bus from the railway station to the free hotel. The situation in the Sudanese hotel was the worst. Now no visitor could sleep in the compound unless he wanted to freeze to death. In each room there would sleep 7 to 10 asylum seekers. Inaz, being the only female visitor, was allowed to share the only bed with another Indian girlfriend. The two girls were given blanket for covering. The blanket was old and full of holes. Joseph and other 6 boys slept on the solid floor without covering. He spent his night shaking and his teeth were knocking together. It was impossible to sleep in that deep freeze. Summer is more tolerable than winter in New Delhi. Summer is long, extending from early April to October. Bombay has the best weather in the world. There is no winter in Bombay. The temperature would not climb to more than 30 Celsius degrees. You don't need winter jacket or blanket. We would again bypass the suffering and hardships the persecuted couple were experiencing in the capital of India and go directly to the Sudanese embassy and try to find out what had happened to the expired passport of Inaz. First of all, Inaz was not the first Sudanese student studying at the University of Bombay that the Sudanese embassy had tried to send back to Sudan. It happened before a boy by the name of Salah was kidnapped through the corrupt police of Bombay and sent back to Sudan. Likewise, a girl by the name of Shadia was returned to Khartoum via the same wicked plot. Those 2 students had not done what Inaz had done. Salah was returned to Sudan under the request of his family. He couldn't finish his study and spent years fooling his parents that he was still working towards his science degree. Shadia was accused of having some Indian boyfriends and some Sudanese students claimed to have seen her sitting on motorbikes with her Indian lovers. When she went to renew her passport in New Delhi, it was seized from her and on the same day she was flown back to Sudan. Inaz's crimes were innumerable and abominable. She was considered the most sinful, evil, and despicable Sudanese girl ever set foot on the soil of India. Every Sudanese official inside that den of kidnappers wanted to send the infamous Inaz Ahmed Salah back to Khartoum to stand trial of apostasy and adultery, condemn, and put to death for her unpardonable crimes. The most intolerable of them were her open apostasy and adultery. Accordingly, as soon as her passport arrived it was forwarded to the office of the ambassador. It was renewed, but kept on hold. They wanted her to come personally and ask for it. They had prepared everything for her transfer to Sudan. Chapter 52. The Lost Passport. Inaz was trembling and shaking like a reed when she dragged her feet inside the Sudanese embassy. She sensed danger was surrounding her from all directions after her eyes spotted long-bearded officers. Every face was written all over it a dangerous terrorist. They looked unfriendly and serious. There was not a single female among them. The frightened Inaz felt she had entered by mistake a mosque of the supporters of the Muhammadan Sunnah. If her dear husband wasn't with her and holding her hand she would have turned her back and fled for dear life. Were they going to catch her and kill her like the Saudi dissident journalist Adnan was murdered inside his consulate in Turkey? They brutally murdered him, cut his body into pieces, and finally burned his remains in a furnace inside the residence of the consul. After assassinating her, those Muslim terrorists might cut her body with axe into small parts and dump her remains in a hole somewhere outside New Delhi. Would they also assassinate her Ethiopian husband and likewise get rid of his body? Inaz tried to convince her husband to forget about her passport and their trip to Ethiopia and live illegally in India. Joseph told her, the Indian police would send her against her wish back to Sudan, if they found out she had no passport and police permission to stay in their country. Inaz went to the first bearded man and spoke to him in faint voice and introduced herself, her husband's name and his relation to her and explained the reason of her visit. My name is Inaz Ahmed Salah. This is my husband Joseph Abraha. We both are doing a medical program at the University of Bombay. I have come to inquire about my Sudanese passport. The bearded man flashed Inaz with a big smile and said happily, what has happened to your passport? It has been expired and I have sent it to the embassy for renewal. It has been long time since I mailed it to you. Can you tell me your full name again? My name is Inaz Ahmed Salah. The bearded man pretended to know nothing about the satanic female creature standing in flesh and bones in front of him. That was the way every Sudanese employee in the embassy referred to the apostate and adulterous Sudanese girl. If he happened to meet her in any governmental office in Sudan, he wouldn't hesitate for a second to kill her. Nevertheless, he knew he was in the Indian soil and not his Muslim Sudan. He then entered Inaz's name in his computer and pretended to be going through many names and searching for information about her missing passport. After that, he picked up his cell phone and sent a text message to his ambassador. He didn't wait for long before he received a reply. He carefully read it before he began to address Inaz. Yes, Mrs. Inaz Ahmed Salah, our embassy has received your application in along with your expired passport. My computer showed that your application has been processed and your passport has been renewed and sent back to your address at Bombay. I haven't received it. Have you checked with the Bombay Post Office? I haven't, but why the Bombay Post Office wouldn't deliver my passport if they had received it? Well, there are cases of Sudanese students' passports got lost in the Indian mail. After all, India is well known for this kind of problem. Many times, Indian postmen were caught stealing passports of foreign students. What shall I do? I can't live in India without a valid passport. In that case, you have to either apply for a new Sudanese passport or else return to Bombay and complain about your missing passport. Before you complain to the police, you should better check with your local post office. Sir, Joseph spoke for the first time, can I ask you a question? The bearded man eyed the handsome Ethiopian boy for some time before he said harshly, what is your question? Can you give us the tracking number of the mail you have sent my wife's passport through? What tracking number are you talking about? My wife and I have sent an empty return envelope with already paid stamps. That envelope has a tracking number. If you have sent the renewed passport through that envelope, then the New Delhi's post office would have given you the tracking number. I don't know what you are talking about and I don't know what you are trying to prove. I just want to know, how did you send my wife's passport? Are you that kind of a dumb student who is lacking intelligence? I have already said, my computer showed that this Sudanese woman's passport has been renewed and sent back to her. Joseph didn't like the insult, but he controlled his rising emotions. How long it takes for me to get a new passport? Getting a new passport is a long process. No new passport is made here. Our embassy would forward your application to the Ministry of Interior Affairs at Khartoum. It is that ministry which authorized the issuing of a new passport. But I need my passport now because I am traveling with my Ethiopian husband to Addis Ababa. We even have our air tickets with us. I am sorry, madam. You need to wait at least 1 month before you get a new passport. Sometimes, you may get it after 2 months. But why can't she get her old passport? What do you mean? You mean to say we are hiding her old passport? I didn't mean to accuse the embassy. But the Sudanese embassy is responsible about its lost. Can you prove it? Okay, sir, I want to apply for a new passport right now. Go ahead and fill the application form. Submit 2 passport-size photos, and pay the required fees. Then the bearded man took a form from his desk and handed it to Inaz. Chapter 53. The Police Raid. Inaz thanked God million times for coming out of that den of lawbreakers without being killed or harmed. She took the empty form in one hand and her other hand held the hand of her husband and walked out. She innocently believed the story of the bearded man and decided to apply for new passport. She knew she had no other option. Her husband wasn't convinced by the words of the officer. He believed his wife's passport was either destroyed or hid in the embassy. But he could prove none of the 2 possibilities. So, he agreed with his wife to fill the form and apply for new passport. Before filling and submitting the new application, Inaz had to make 2 passport-size photos. For that, they needed to go to Palika Bazaar at Connaught Place in Old Delhi. Moreover, the couple were very hungry. They didn't eat food since yesterday. Old Delhi had cheap restaurants. Wherefore, the persecuted Sudanese girl postponed the submission of her application for the following day. Inaz and Joseph would never have expected that they were tailed as soon as they came out of the embassy. A couple of Indians followed them immediately after they emerged out of the den of the kidnappers. Those 2 Indians were employed by the embassy and tasked to spy and find out where the infamous Inaz was staying. That day, wherever the couple went, those 2 spies followed them. They went behind them to Palika Bazaar where Inaz got her 2 photos made. They also followed them to the Nizamuddin railway station and waited in front of a cheap Muslim roasted meat restaurant. While the couple were enjoying the tasty roasted meat, Thing 1 and Thing 2 were also chewing egg sandwiches, which they purchased from a local vendor who moved around with hand-pushed cart. The couple also sat in a public park and talked for a long time. Those spies were hiding behind a tree and carefully watching them. Finally, at the evening time, the couple arrived in a crowded bus to their free-of-charge hotel. The 2 Indian guys traveled with them in the same bus and also got down at the same bus stop. Joseph and Inaz never noticed or suspected that they were tailed all that time. That day, the couple narrated their experience in the Sudanese embassy with other asylum seekers. All those Sudanese students told Inaz she had done big mistake by sending her passport for renewal through the mail. They even advised her not to submit her new application personally. According to them, she should go to the UN office and hand her application to them. And it was the UN office's duty to forward her application to the Sudanese embassy. In that case, the embassy would not play again that game of the passport got lost in the mail. The embassy had to send someone in person and deliver the new passport to the UN office. Then the UN office would send the new passport to her address in Bombay. Inaz and Joseph liked the idea of involving the UN office in this important process. They wished that they had known the brilliant idea before sending the expired passport through the mail. Nevertheless, before the morning came, the Sudanese hotel was raided by some New Delhi cops. They were all in their khaki uniforms and they were all armed. The police claimed that they had received many complaints from the neighbors against the occupants of the apartment. The neighbors complained about loud noise of music, huge gathering of black Africans, and sexual harassment of the Indian women who passed in front of the apartment. Moreover, the neighbors claimed to have seen some young Indian girls who were possibly prostitutes entering the apartment and spending the night selling their bodies to those African students. Therefore, the police mistook Inaz and the Naga girl as those prostitutes. 2 young pretty girls sleeping in the same room with 15 young boys without any one of the boys making move on one of them was hard to believe. Joseph showed his marriage certificate with Inaz, but the Indian police refused to accept it as justification for the young Sudanese girl to spend her night surrounded by those black African boys. Some Indians believe that African men are horny and easily aroused sexually. Therefore, they think that the African men have no control on their sexual organs just like the animals. After accusing Inaz and the other Indian girl of being hookers, the police demanded that every foreign students to show them their passports and permits to stay in India. Everyone provided those documents except Inaz. Joseph defended his wife and requested the police to contact the Sudanese embassy on the following day. The police said they were going to detain Inaz until they would contact her embassy. They also arrested the Naga girl under the charge of practicing disguised prostitution. So, Inaz was taken under custody on 2 charges, a disguised hooker and illegally staying in India. Joseph tried to convince the Indian police to take him with his wife but they refused. They told him his wife would be detained in the women's jail. They advised him to go in the morning to his wife's embassy and informed them about her arrest. That night, the police of New Delhi detained no other visitor or tenant except the 2 girls, the Sudanese girl and the Naga girl. The third girl, the Southern Sudanese, happened to be away with her Southern Sudanese boyfriend. They went to watch a late-night movie. Chapter 54. The Second Kidnap. Inaz didn't know she had been kidnapped again until the police car reached the Indira Gandhi International Airport. This time, her kidnap had been carried out in a flawless scheme that neither her husband nor she had suspected something fishy about her arrest. Everyone in that apartment believed the story of the neighbors complaining about prostitution activities which taking place under their watch. Inez had long and straight hair, and because she had fair skin color everybody saw her mistook her for an Indian girl. The other girl was an Indian although she looked like a Chinese. So, one could understand the problem of the neighbors when they saw two such girls living in a two-bedrooms apartment with more than 17 black boys. No Indian girl would fall in love with a black boy even if that boy happened to be an Indian like her from South India. As the cleverly cover-up story told by the corrupt Indian police, the two girls were there to sell their bodies to those black bachelors. Joseph thought that his beloved wife would be released as soon as the New Delhi police would contact the Sudanese embassy and confirmed her innocence. However, that night he could not sleep. He was just waiting for that long and gloomy night to pass. He determined to take his beloved on the following day and both go to the UN office and submit the application. That done, he decided the two of them would head directly to the railway station and travel back to Bombay. He regretted that he agreed to live with his wife in that hellish habitat with those many Sudanese students. He wouldn't blame those decent Indian neighbors who thought the free apartment was a brothel and a tavern. Any decent citizen, if he saw his wife and the Naga girl living and sleeping with those African students, would conclude the apartment was the bordello where those young boys were engaging in sexual activity with those lovely prostitutes. Inez was strictly warned in advance before she was informed she was going in a direct flight to her country. Her trip was from New Delhi to Khartoum without stop at any airport. Her Sudanese captors were afraid that Inez might do what the Saudi teenager Rahaf Mohammed al-Qunan had done after she escaped from her Saudi family because of her conversion from Islam. Rahaf ran away from her family in Kuwait and flew to Thailand. After being denied entry into Thailand, she rallied support on Twitter to avoid being deported, saying she feared her relatives might kill her if she were returned to them. The United Nations stepped in and granted her refugee asylum. Canada immediately granted the 18-year-old Saudi girl, Rahaf Mohammed al-Qunan, resettlement, and shortly she was flown to Toronto. So, those terrorist diplomats didn't want Inez to stop at any airport and act as the apostate Saudi teenager did. Inez's plane was scheduled to fly her from the capital of India to the capital of Sudan, and once she landed in Khartoum, not even the president of the greatest country in the world, Mr. Donald Trump, could save her life. She was told by the Indian police that, if she resisted, cried, or tried to escape from them, they would inject her body with a powerful sedative called ketamine. That sedative ketamine would subdue her and turn her into a vegetable. After that, they would put her unconscious body in a wheelchair and wheel her inside her plane and chain her to her seat and send her to Khartoum. They warned her that the powerful anesthetic sedative ketamine could cause major side effects. For instance, some of the violent suspects who were sedated stopped breathing and had to be rushed to the emergency room. In her situation, there would be no emergency unit inside her plane and during her direct flight. Therefore, most probably, she would reach her country a dead corpse. Inez understood that the Indian police meant business. Such corrupt cops would do whatever they want to do to their victims. As long as they were wearing their khaki uniforms, no one would risk his life and come between them and their unarmed and helpless victim. Accordingly, the terribly abused and persecuted Sudanese girl once again accepted her kismet in life and submitted her fate in the hands of her maker. She also concluded that she had been separated from her handsome and kind Ethiopian lover forever. He was the only human being who believed everything she told him about her sad past life. He had never forsaken her or left her for a second. Only when those lawbreakers had arrested them in Bombay and dragged them from their apartment like dangerous criminals did he separate from her against his wish. Likewise, the same fate followed them to New Delhi and they got torn apart by other corrupt Indian police. Unfortunately, this time their separation was final and forever. Inaz knew it was either luck, mere coincidence, or a miracle made that kind Indian Christian Mary to see her with those wicked Bombay Muslim police officers and informed her good husband Vijay Alexander. Her husband happened to be flying in the same night to Muscat City. Today, she found herself in the same helpless situation, but she was 1,400 kilometers away from those kind Christians. Even God would not repeat that miracle again, thought Inaz. Miracle like luck happens once in someone's life. Nevertheless, Inaz offered a silent prayer and waited for her abductors to take her inside that damned plane. Since she was arrested 4 hours ago, Inaz didn't use the washroom. She begged one of the 2 cops to allow her to go to the ladies' washroom. She told him, she wouldn't mind if he wanted to follow her inside the washroom and stand in front of the toilet's door and guard it. The cop talked with the other police officer before he agreed to take her to the women's washroom. But he strictly warned her against trying to escape. He told her that he wouldn't hesitate for a second to shoot her if she tried to run away. Inaz assured him that she would not do such a foolish thing. Then the policeman took her until the door of the washroom, but he could not enter the ladies' washroom. He knew there was one single entry to the washroom and therefore he guarded it with his loaded gun in hand. Even so, he told Inaz if she won't come out in 5 minutes, he would come in and drag her out even if she was undone and undressed and fully naked. Inaz nodded her head in agreement and walked in. Chapter 55. The Gate of Paradise and the Gate of Hell. Meanwhile, Joseph didn't sleep throughout that long winter night. As early as 5 a.m., he left the South Sudanese hotel and took a bus and headed towards the United Nations office. He was carrying with him the application of his beloved Inaz. Some of those Sudanese asylum seekers put some hope in his heart. They told him the unjustly arrest of his wife by those Indian police officers might lead the UN office to grant her refugee status. Inaz's false charge of being a prostitute disguising herself as a foreign student had nothing to do with her case with the UN office. Even so, Joseph still hoped that her legal representative might see her unlawful detention a sufficient ground to grant her the refugee status and free her from that malicious accusation. Also, he decided to tell the UN office that his wife was arrested because she had neither a passport nor a permit to continue her residence in India. Joseph arrived 2 hours before the UN office opened its gate for the asylum seekers. Luckily, he found some poor Afghani families had created a large outdoor bonfire to keep them and their little ones warm against that freezing winter of New Delhi. The bonfire was made from bales of straw and broken wood. Those displaced Afghani people were driven out of their country by the never-ending war between the NATO troops and the Taliban Mujahideen fighters. Joseph joined them and like them waited for the gate of paradise to be opened and take them to the promised land of the infidels, the land that flows with honey and money. Unfortunately, when the angel of Allah opened the wicket gate, Joseph happened to be standing as number 55 in the long queue. The wicket gate of paradise was only 1 person wide, it only allowed entry 1 at a time and enabled the armed security guard to better control access into the taboo ground. Sadly, when his turn came, Joseph wasn't allowed to enter inside that holy ground. The guard took his wife's application and promised to pass it to her legal representative. Joseph pleaded and begged the security guard to allow him to meet Mrs. Salma Muhammad Ahmed and tell her about the new serious developments in his wife's case. The security guard told him he was wasting his time and also delaying other displaced asylum seekers. By then, hundreds of those wretched Afghani and Iranian asylum seekers began to shout their protests and hail Joseph with many curses and insults. After the gate of paradise didn't give him access, Joseph decided to go and knock on the gate of hell. So, he took another bus and headed towards the Sudanese embassy. This time, he didn't have great expectations. He just wanted to request those bearded Muslim terrorists to contact the police of New Delhi and clear his wife from the charge of staying illegally in India. He wanted them to say his wife's renewed passport got lost in the mail which had been sent by them. For that reason, the Sudanese foreign student Inaz Ahmed Salah had come all the way from Bombay to New Delhi to apply in person for a new passport. Joseph was absolutely certain that the Sudanese embassy would accept his request and contact the police authorities. Once again, his hope was dashed after he talked with the same bearded man. The Sudanese man told Joseph the police of New Delhi were supposed to contact them and not the other way around. Besides, the bearded man said, there were thousands of police stations in the capital city of India, which one the embassy had to contact. Then Joseph unwillingly told the bearded man, the second charge which also led to the arrest of his wife. He said, his wife and other Naga girl were falsely accused by the Indian neighbors as prostitutes undercover. He then explained to him the circumstances which led those neighbors to call the police and report the two girls as practicing disguised form of prostitution. The bearded man said sarcastically, no Muslim husband would take his wife to such a place and expose her nakedness to hundreds of unmarried men. Joseph told him, their financial position forced them to stay in that free of charge apartment of those four kind South Sudanese students. The bearded man said in response to Joseph's justification, even if he had to take his wife to sleep with him in the railway station surrounded by thousands of beggars or both of them sleep on the open street, he wouldn't take her to sleep in the same room with those Christian Southerners. Finally, the bearded man decided to get rid of Joseph. Wherefore, he told him, it was his duty, as a husband to appoint a lawyer for his Sudanese wife to defend her in court.